Hey, good evening, everybody. My name's Brent Cheney. I'm a shareholder at the law firm Parker Milliken in Los Angeles, and I'm going to moderate this event for us tonight. We're very excited. We have three excellent environmental consultants that are going to tell us what to expect in the aftermath of the fire, including how to maximize or work on maximizing insurance claims and how to keep yourself safe after the fires. So, before we get started, we will take questions and try to provide answers during the seminar. We're going to do the questions and answers at the end, but there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom page. And any questions you want to ask the panelists, we ask that you type them into the Q&A and we'll get through as many of the questions as we can. So first up, our first speaker is going to be Bryan Hill. He serves as the technical director at Partner Engineering and Science. He has over 20 years of experience in professional guidance and environmental consulting in industrial hygiene services. He specializes in indoor air quality assessment, hazardous material management, and disaster response services. He has provided clients with help on managing hurricane relief projects and conducting extensive wildlife-related environmental assessments. He also is a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. The second speaker will be Ewelina Mutkowska, who is the supervising watershed engineer at Rincon. She also is an instructor of environmental technologies at Ventura College. She, like Bryan, and as well as the next consultant, all have over 20 years experience. She spent time at the California Stormwater Quality Association, and she spent over 13 years working with Ventura County Public Works Agency as a stormwater program manager. And in that role, she dealt with a lot of fire issues, especially with, I believe, the Thomas Fire. And lastly, you'll hear from Richard Beck at Michael Baker International, who's been with them for over 20 years. He has extensive environmental planning experience, specifically in regulatory, ecological restoration, and fire planning disciplines. His notable projects include representing CalRecycle's inland fire wildlife recovery as a result of the 2020 Northern California fires, where he served as a project manager. He's also worked on various safety mitigation projects for the city of Yorba Linda and Cal Fire, as well as post-fire maintenance for Orange County Public Works and other fire-related incidents. So I really hope that you enjoy what these fabulous consultants have to say. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bryan Hill of Partner.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen with everybody here. How's that look, Brent? Am I all squared away here?
You have not shared yet, Bryan.
And we're getting there.
There you go.
There we go. All right. Thanks again for the intro. As Brent mentioned, a lot of experience in the industry. Unfortunately, when it comes to natural disasters, whether it's a hurricane, and being a California resident with wildfires here, my experience in the insurance industry part of it is I've been brought on in many instances to be a part of an expert team for actual insurance carriers or adjusters with a previous company. So it was a large global insurance adjusting company. Again, just to be a part of their expert team. So through that time, learned a lot about just the insurance processes and language and things like that. So I feel like I'll be able to help everybody who doesn't deal with this on a daily basis. And given the unfortunate events, I know there's a lot of questions and many more answers and conflicts. So hopefully I can bring some clarity to that. Full disclosure, I'm not an insurance adjuster by any means. Just have a lot of experience in dealing with them and certain insurance companies out there. So, made some tips up, some slides here. Not real attractive. This is the Palisades most recently, and the neighborhoods. So to those of you that experienced that, um, our hearts go out for you. It's pretty scary out there. So I'll just start here. Number one tip: obtaining a complete copy of your residential homeowners insurance policy, which includes the declarations page. A declarations page is really just a glance summary with all the key information. That's where you're going to find your coverage limits, your premiums, deductibles. That's an important page where you know who is actually on the policy, spouses, relatives, anyone who's under 21. I tell a lot of people before things happen like this, and you have a new insurance policy, or let's say you just renewed yours, it's really a smart thing to do is go through your home and video absolutely everything, because the way insurance works is pre-existing conditions, pre-loss conditions. So if you can provide them with information about what the home, all the contents that you have, all the valuables that you have, what that was like before you experienced a wildfire or a flood or whatever it may be, you have that information at hand. So um, and just review and go over your declarations page and make sure that it makes sense. Um, the law requires that your insurance company provide this to you within 30 days of a request. So if you lose it, then um, you should be able to have it within a month here, and that should include an explanation of extended replacement costs and building code upgrades. These are important in natural disaster situations, because you may have had a policy for 20 years, and prices increase, labor increase, materials and prices go up. You're entitled to upgrades and code upgrades. So knowing what that part of your policy is important to know. Additional living expenses. Understanding what your additional living expenses are because you're displaced out of your home is very important. Um, and being able to track all your additional expenses that arise. I mean, from the day you have to evacuate or leave your home because it's unsuitable, I recommend tracking all your additional expenses that arise from that. That's food, clothing, having to live in another location that's far away from home because there's no occupancy anywhere else, and you're forced to move far away. I know of people recently that are all the way in Vegas because that seems to be the most suitable place for them to relocate and live a normal life. Document your conversations. Part of the claim process is going to be you make a claim, you call your insurance carrier, they assign an adjuster. A field adjuster comes out. They're going to come look at the property, listen to what you have to say about what you've experienced, take their own internal notes, bring it back to the office. What they record, what they see may be different than what you experienced. So, keeping what's called a claim diary is a great way to document the sequence of events that happen. So, ask questions when that field adjuster comes out. I'm a big fan of asking, do you have experience in wildfire claims? Are you local? Are you from California? Or are you from Texas or Illinois? And, this is the first time that you're dealing with wildfire claims, because the specific insurance carrier may be short on field adjusters. I mean, it's a very common occurrence that happens. So that will help you get an understanding of what you're dealing with, not just your carrier, but the field adjuster. Some of the important things to ask also is, are you going to be my adjuster throughout the life of this claim? Is there a desk adjuster? And if there is a desk adjuster, what's their role in this? So, trying to feel out what happens in the field when they come and visit your property, when you already understand what your policies are and what you're entitled to, is a very important step in getting through your claim and trying to get back to normal. Then you get to the contractors. Now you have contractors that are coming in, and maybe they are recommended from your insurance carrier or the adjuster. That's fine. There's some good contractors out there that are on these vendor programs for the insurance carriers that have not run out of California, but you want to get one that's licensed. It's the same thing as the field adjuster. Are you local, or did you just get your license because all of this stuff happened? That's a very common occurrence also. So understanding what you're dealing with, getting multiple bids is important. You'll see here on this slide, there's some resources from the California Department of Insurance that talks about not getting scammed. There's some really good stuff there also, where you can then go in and you check the contractor state license board also. And then if you're having troubles with your insurance specifically or the adjuster, you can try the Department of Insurance hotline, and make complaints and or just express any concerns you may have. And your insurance company may not provide its own estimate, but when they do, that's why it's important to have a good contractor on your side, because they could be missing things, there could be errors, or they fail to reflect local permits and conditions there. There's always a demand on materials and labor in these times because of the severity of the natural disaster here. Then you get to the point where the contractors complete with their work and cleaning. Maybe they've removed some of the debris and we're ready to start rebuilding. Part of the insurance policy is that you can purchase or rebuild at another location. You're entitled to receive full replacement costs and benefits, which do include building code upgrades and extended replacement cost benefits, which I spoke about. The Palisades is kind of an older community. There's a lot of homes that are built in the mid to late 70s. So building code upgrades is going to be a pretty hot topic out there. And just know that you have rights when it comes to that. And again, that goes back to making sure that you have a reliable, knowledgeable contractor that understands what the codes are for these specific areas. And another part, if you have re-cleaning or you have cleaning that's happening and there's remediation, because that first slide that shows the smoke path of migration, there's a lot of activity with combustion byproduct and intrusion. Having a company come out to provide a third party, non-biased opinion, really just having the building's best interest in mind and the owner's best interest in mind to make sure that you feel comfortable reoccupying your home. Some of the things that I've done for many, many years, which is coming in after contractors have done remediation cleaning from the attic all the way down out to the garage, and come in and just verify that the work has been successful, and collecting samples, surface, air samples, whatever it may be, based on the situation to make sure that homeowners and their families are comfortable reoccupying their properties. Just another tip, because I know, things happen really fast, especially in a wildfire type situation, is you kind of want things to happen quickly. You want to get back to your normal life. You really, you know, it's more beneficial to sit back and assess the situation. Don't rush into any decisions with contractors, lawyers, public adjusters, which we'll get to. Um, you really want to consider your mortgage, talk to your mortgage companies, talk to your employers, really try to understand your financial situation. If you're elderly, that's a big part of it. You want to just really take your time, make sure that there's there's a process with everything. So you just take it one step at a time. Um, the schools were devastated in these areas, so I can't imagine what families are going through, having to relocate children and all that. So dealing with the construction aspect of it and the insurance aspect is just another factor that you have to deal with. So you want to just take your time, and really make sure that you cover all angles and make sure that the information is clear. And with this one, not assuming that you have inadequate coverage, a lot of people are on California Fair Plan, but I've seen a lot of variance in people's coverages. A lot of people think that they're not going to have great coverage because of California Fair Plan, and that's the only choice that they had. Again, look into that policy, feel out the adjuster, really try to understand what your rights are, so that you're not getting shortchanged by any means. So don't assume that you have inadequate coverage just based on general information or the neighbors. It's a very tight knit community in the Palisades and even out in Pasadena. So neighbors talk. Everybody should be sharing information. Just make sure that you cross check it and what you're hearing is actually true, or you're going to hear it straight from a field adjuster that's assigned or the desk adjuster. Because limits, like it says here in the second bullet point, should be addressed on a case-by-case specific basis to determine how much it will cost to rebuild your home, whether your limits, including the extended replacement cost coverage, if applicable, are adequate. Public adjusters and/or getting attorneys involved. Most public adjusting companies do have an attorney-backed, back of the house, and/or their field adjusters have insurance experience. This is my opinion only. What I would say is, one, I've worked for public adjusters. They've called me in to help evaluate situations where there's questionable coverage. Really evaluate whether you're going to need a public adjuster or attorney to help you with your claim. There are actually a lot of good insurance companies out there that want to do the right thing. What I would say is, if you're feeling there's negligence involved, or you don't have faith in your adjuster and they're trying to minimize the claim and cut corners and really not have to pay what's owed, then it might be worth talking to a public adjuster. The way public adjusters work also is they will try to maximize the claim because they get their fees from anything outside of what has already been signed and or approved for adjustment. So or approved on your claim. as covered. So it's really subjective to how the process is going. Once you get to the point where the claim has been made, an adjuster has come out, they're reporting back on what they're going to cover or not. And I suggest when you get to that point, based on the interactions and what has happened already, is where you decide to get an attorney or public adjuster involved.
Great. Thank you, Bryan. Next, we're going to hear from Ewelina, who's going to talk about erosion issues. So, Ewelina.
Do you see my screen? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Yes? Okay, great, perfect. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about post-fire hazard. In addition to dealing with lost property, lost house, damaged house due to the wildfire, there is another headache. Those are all the post-fire hazard that are highly potential within the fire burned areas. The two main fires from last month, the Palisades and Eaton fire, heartbreaking, so many challenges, so many properties damaged, lost houses. It's really overwhelming of trying to grasp and plan on recovery, and it's a huge tragedy. So as I mentioned, Bryan gave us an overview of how you deal with your property with recovery. But another headache and another thing you need to be aware of, you need to plan on, are the hazards due to wildfires. Those potential impacts from wildfires, they do not stop when the fire is contained. Impacts can be on residences, on facilities, especially flood control facilities, infrastructure, roads, access to roads, and they can continue for multiple years until a watershed recovers. We've heard maybe 3, maybe 5 years, but it's really not certain. It depends on many factors. One thing to remember is that not two fires are the same. And I'm going to show you an example of the post-fire combined hazards for Palisades and Eaton to show you how both areas are in a slightly different situation, considering the combined hazards for the debris flow after the fires. And the severity, size of a fire, topography, climate are key factors in determining the potential risk or problem areas after a fire. So this graphic shows you a complex processes that take place during the wildfires. The loss of vegetation, loss of the vegetative cover, the soil changing its property, becoming more hydrophobic, less accepting of water, of letting water to infiltrate, causes a ripple effect of processes that result in increased runoff, debris flow, and that's what the property owners within the fire burned areas should be aware of, should plan on, should try to protect themselves and minimize the potential additional damage. So I'm going to talk briefly about dry gravel loading, erosion from rainfall impacts, debris flows, and flooding and debris flooding. In this picture, these are the mountains right behind the Altadena. You can see the loss of vegetation. You can see the loss of vegetative cover. You can see potential for a lot of loose material. I thought this picture illustrates the situation after a wildfire very well. So dry gravel loading, this is right after the land disturbances like wildfire. It's during the dry weather, so it's not raining yet, but there's a lot of loose material, especially on the steep slopes. Sediment, soil grains, aggregates, rocks, everything is ready to basically move downhill by the gravity. And this dry, this loose material will deposit at the bottom of the slopes. It will potentially also deposit in flood control channels, decreasing the capacity of the channels, having a potential to be transported during intense storms and causing potential flooding. Erosion is a natural process. When it rains, the loose material, soil particles will detach. They will be transported and deposited at the bottom of the slope. But the problem after the wildfire is that this process is being much worse. There's much more loose materials that are deposited during the dry weather, and then on top of this are being deposited by the process of erosion during the rainfall. Fire severity is an important factor influencing soil changes during the fire. Number one issue is reduced organic matter in the soil, increased soil density, disruption of soil microbial communities, and a higher erosion potential. The soil becomes hydrophobic, which means it doesn't allow water to infiltrate. It has this waxy feeling, and as a result, the runoff potential is much higher than in the situation without the wildfire. A rapidly moving mixture of ash, dirt, rocks, trees, vegetation debris, and water travels down the valley, down the slope, and that's by the definition is a debris flow. Here's a picture from last month, the first storm event in the Palisade fire burn area. You can see debris on the road being cleaned up by the public agency. The fire again, and then the steep slopes will exacerbate the potential for the debris flows. And as I mentioned before, it's because of that loss of vegetative cover and potential for additional loose material in the drainage channels. Here are two maps from the USGS, United States Geological Survey website. In this case, they show a combined hazard. If you're interested, there are also results of model conducted by USGS in terms of how much flow and likelihood of debris flow. But basically what you're looking at is the prediction of the level of combined hazard for 15-minute rainfall intensity of the one-year storm. So in case of the Palisades fire, that's 0.95 inch per hour intensity. And in case of Eaton fire, that's 1.6 inch per hour. You can see that one-year storm, the storm that will occur at 100% within a year, is of a much higher intensity in the Eaton fire, and that combined hazard within the most of the Eaton fire area is high. There are also high areas in the Palisades fire. So debris flows likes and dislikes, how to what will encourage, what will enhance debris flow, large areas to capture rainfall relative to the channel width, steep slopes with material to grab, including dry gravel loading, steep and narrow channels, drainage that exit at the narrow point, high rainfall rates, intensities, and long rainfall duration. On the other hand, if we are able to install obstacles, restriction, like for example, the metal nets shown in the pictures or fences, we will slow down and reduce the debris flow. Also curvy wide channels that widen at the bottom, decrease gradients, gentle slopes, and for the debris flow to be captured upstream from the urban, residential, commercial, basically properties will help reduce, minimize, mitigate the impact. So debris basins, very important to be ready, to be maintained by the public agencies, and then installation of any other restrictions, obstacles like net barriers. There are short-term and long-term potential hazards of debris flows. That first intense storm, expect the runoff to contain the debris. Debris flows may occur within some channels, especially dangerous if the channel is really close to the property. Inlets to storm drains and road culverts may become clogged and overtopped, and flooding may clog roads and impacts downslope neighborhoods. Throughout the subsequent storms, it's important to be aware that there will be an increased potential for debris flows due to additional sediment in channels and saturated soil conditions. Steeper slow area may experience failures or superficial soils, and roadways may become impassable, especially in the event of clogged storm drain, inlets, catch basins, and road failures. So then when the debris flooding occurs, here are the pictures from Topanga Canyon from just the last month. You see that the road becomes inaccessible and needs to be cleaned up. So how to get through the next 3, 5 or so years until the watershed recovers? It's important to understand the post-fire processes and hazards in general in the watershed, but also specifically for your property. There's a lot of good resources and information prepared by the local agency, state agency, and the federal agencies. Definitely make sure you register for the alert by the LA County emergency notifications. All the current conditions are discussed at the public meetings, and those are conducted online. The recordings are available online. And then if you're ready to return to your property, there's a very good reference prepared by Los Angeles County frequently asked questions. Right now, the phase 1 of the property preparation by removing hazardous waste and asbestos removal was accomplished in areas, and property owners are starting to return to their properties. So it's a good time to not only plan on the rebuild, but also think about the erosion control and site stabilization. It's critical to plan and implement, especially for partially damaged properties. You do not want to endanger the part of your house that it survived the fire, and in areas of the high debris flow hazards. The best way is to reach out to local assistance center. The local agencies have a lot of resources, a lot of information helpful in planning and implementing those type of controls. Property assessment resources, property site specific information, maps, more detailed than the ones I was showing you, erosion control information, and other resources. And that concludes my presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewelina. And I know we're getting questions, and we will get to the insurance questions. We have a lot about the extended replacement cost and building grade upgrades. We'll get to that. But before we move on to Richard, there was one very specific erosion question. While we have you, Ewelina, I just wanted to get that one out. Okay. And that question is, what are the physics that cause the soil to become hydrophobic or less permeable? If you can answer that. You're on mute.
Oh, you want me to answer right now? Okay, I was ready to start typing. Okay. No. This is the loss of the organic matter, the microbial community that's been disturbed, and basically soil turns more hydrophobic, that topsoil. Depending on severity of the fire, it can be even thicker layer of soil, and that's where the water is not able to infiltrate, and that runoff increases and causes problems downstream.
Right. Thank you. Richard, you're up.
All right, we will go ahead and share. Great, I think we're set to go. Well, thank you for everybody. I'd like to conclude the series of these presentations. I think they're all building on each other. First of all, I'm humbled to present. I know a lot of people have been impacted by these fires, and with great respect, I wanted to share kind of what I've seen over the years through different fire scenarios that we've been working on, and then trying to share some resources as well as we move forward. You know, this webinar series is only one component, and I love seeing all the resources that have been shared to date. There's so much out there online. Try to just pay attention when so many of these websites are released. They've really gotten to be so informative and interactive as we recover from these fires. And my presentation is going to zoom in a little bit to the individual parcel. And with each of these situations, when we have a disaster, everyone is impacted so differently. And what I'd like to focus on is common trends that we see for folks trying to return to either their parcel or their home. We've had a lot of questions on, my house still remains, but it was surrounded by the fires and there's smoke and ash. What do I do next? That's really the basis of what I'd like to discuss today. And, it's just amazing. We've seen these pictures over and over again in all sorts of media outlets, and it's so important not to become numb to all of the media and to remember that we're still in an emergency. And sometimes that kind of fades away throughout the process as we go through these phases. And it's been shocking to see, first of all, I work for a planning, design, and construction firm. So we deal with a lot of different components of the fires. And one thing that we know for sure is there's a secondary and a primary impact. And when these fires originally hit, we know that there's potential for loss of life and property. And being aware of all these different types of impacts is just critical. And it's only ironic, right, that as we present tonight, it's raining out the window and several inches of rain are proposed over the next couple of days. And that's that secondary impact that can occur, just as we talked about in the last slide deck. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that we're aware of the concerns that are out there, and then also ways to mitigate those potential impacts as we move forward. Part of those impacts as we look forward, we want to, first of all, think of a few themes throughout the process of rebuild. First of all, safety first. As I mentioned, this is still an emergency. There are those impacts that can come through, certainly during the cleanup phase. Just as Bryan mentioned, prioritize, focus on what matters most. And we have to do that often, on the larger scale cleanup effort, whether it's state, local, and different groups that are doing the cleanup. But as individuals, as we go back to our own properties, we certainly can prioritize and lead ourselves as we move forward. There's a lot that can happen all at once, and it can be overwhelming. So we want to separate out what's in our control and what's not in our control. And that typically will help just clear the mind a bit and allow you to work through so many of these issues that we're covering. And we're just covering just a small amount this evening. And then finally, patience. It takes time. And it's been impressive so far how fast the recovery is occurring. Major General Kelly with the Corps of Engineers today mentioned how a portion of the reason why things are moving so swiftly is the lessons learned from the prior fires. And he was speaking specifically about Lahaina and the Maui recovery. And as we move forward, we just need to remember that patience, even though it will never be fast enough to rebuild. We need to be, dealers in hope, as Napoleon said. And I think as we do that, we can move forward with a better understanding of how to rebuild and be as resilient as we can as we move forward. So let's start with safety. Safety is number one. And as we look forward to returning to parcels that have homes and structures that can be moved into, we first need to wait for that clearance. As was mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Corps of Engineers and FEMA work together very closely. But it's all a phased approach that allows us to work so well. So phase one is hazardous materials is cleaned up on a parcel by parcel basis. It's critical to have that buy-off prior to reassessing your home, especially if you had complete devastation. What the EPA is looking for is household products that can become a concern. So we're talking about cleaning solution products, paints, solvents, all sorts of different hazardous materials that need to be cleaned up prior to the Corps of Engineers coming in and remediating the property and removing all of the debris. So as that occurs, we want to make sure we have the properties evaluated. When our firm was working up in the Northern California fires, for example, one concern was propane tanks and spent ammunition. And this is in more of a rural area, but the concerns were the ammunition going off in smoldering areas. So again, the same type of phase cleanup approach occurred, and that way we can move forward in a safe way, especially as we start to rebuild. Educating yourself on the potential hazards that might be in your neighborhood, your community, and your parcel is critical, and just having that understanding. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on what's in your control is key. Being aware of what's out of your control is just as important. And for that, sometimes you just have to rely on the professionals and the contractors. And you may have a contractor to come into your house to deal with future or current odor issues, or it might be a different type of restoration service. Identifying those contractors, as Bryan mentioned, getting reputable contractors that can do that work is very important. Before you access your property, you also want to have the right personal protection equipment. Just like in the picture here, you know, people have seen those Tyvek suits before. You can wear long sleeves, long pants. It's critical to have your skin covered, because when you're working with ash, especially after the rains, wet ash can actually cause burns, and that's because of the solvents and everything that's connected to it. So having those long sleeves are critical. N95 masks, we're used to these from COVID years, but a different phase right now with ash and just protecting your lungs, especially those that are susceptible with asthma and other concerns health-wise. Currently, County of LA has N95 masks at different distribution centers. Most recently, the libraries were mentioned, and you'll see those at different stations that are offering free protective equipment, as well as gloves and other hand and eye protection. And overall, that eye protection and boots and shoes are very important before you access your property because of the debris and rubble that's out there. Another thing to use caution on is, as I mentioned at the start of the slideshow, is we want to be careful of not assuming assuming that everything is okay as we move into our house. Here in the picture, you know, unfortunately, the house burned next door to them, and we see a lot of this on those homes and communities that have that edge effect, where the fire came right up to their street and thankfully stopped. However, there could still be a significant amount of damage, both on the exterior and interior of the house that remains. So some of that is tied to structural damages that could occur. Smoke and soot damage is very common. That's been noted before. Water damage, typically this can be from adjoining water that's come in from the fire department, other ways of putting out the fire near your home. Also, broken water lines, broken utilities, electrical system damage, as well as just overall toxic residue. So having that knowledge of potential risk is very helpful, because there are ways to mitigate that and reduce the risk as you approach your property. Another area that is usually a big concern that we've seen, Michael Baker, as well as our sister company, Tidal Basin, working through these different fires and now in the Maui post fires, is dead and dying trees. And even though they don't seem like a concern from a distance, is when the fire comes through, not all of the tree will be burned to the ground into ash. And it's very common for trees to remain. The problem with that is once they're dead and dying, they start to lose that root structure and overall ability to hold themselves up. So when we have more Santa Ana winds, for example, or storms like we do this evening, the potential for waterlogged soils as well as trees with poor root systems now is fairly high. We run the risk of losing those trees and they become significant safety concerns as you have the public re-entering these parcels. So getting an understanding of what trees and vegetation remains on your property is very important. We routinely have arborists and other biological specialists that can make the call to see, oh, this tree is going to come back or it is a threat and should be removed. Pipes, rebar, other cables, nails and screws, you name it. Things that remain and simply just did not burn can remain on the property. And this is very critical, especially for foot safety. And as you walk around your property, either looking for things that remained as far as artifacts that are special to you and to your family, but also just it's so important from a field safety condition to have an understanding of what's out there. Especially with the overall concrete removal and debris. I mentioned Corps of Engineers comes through when the properties are safe. Those properties that have been completely decimated, unfortunately, Corps of Engineers will come through and remove that debris, typically down 6 inches on your pad, and basically frame up the property for a future contractor to start that rebuilding process. If you go in before that debris is removed, just use extreme caution because it can be loose. It can cause ankle injuries, knee injuries, and so forth. And then finally, the structural integrity of the home. Floor, walls, and ceilings, you just have to use best judgment and common sense where possible. And again, also working with a professional that can make those calls. Oftentimes after fires, our structural engineers, for example, are called in to assess bridges, different building structures, and so forth. It's just critical to have it safe before we reoccupy and in some cases rebuild and rehabilitate some of these structures. We've mentioned a lot about ash, and ash is a common concern overall and holistically as these significant areas are cleaned up. They're finding ash 100 miles off the coast. Prior to these rains, of course, ash that is blown out to sea due to the winds. Now some of the threat is reduced as far as airborne ash due to the rains. The problem is it now goes into our waterways. And the problem with ash overall, first of all, within the air is it releases VOCs or volatile organic compounds. And these you could think of as products like benzene or formaldehyde, compounds that you just don't want it to breathe in, as I mentioned with the safety gear with the masks. The problem is it could be, first of all, taken in through the lungs, but some of this is so small, like PM 2.5 and other compounds, that they can get into the bloodstream and cause long-term effects. So we want to make sure that we stay safe, we wear that PPE. Here, this graphic kind of shows that the urban fires are a little bit different because we don't have just a forest wood burning fire. We have buildings, we have all sorts of unique items that have burned and have left residue. You can see everything from microplastics, heavy metals, organic carbon, asbestos fire, so asbestos and lead-based paints prior to, basically the late 70s. Most structures will have some component of asbestos or lead-based paints. We want to just make sure we're very cautious with the abatement and cleanup of ash and soot products in the home. All of this attaches to the ash, so when it becomes airborne, it just becomes a real threat. Probably the one item that you've heard in the news is, don't use leaf blowers to get the ash cleaned up on your property. First of all, it spreads all that ash back up into the air, and quite honestly, it just moves it to your neighbor's property. So we'll walk through a couple ways to clean up the ash kind of on the individual homeowner's property in one moment, but just make sure, you know, you're aware of some of those concerns. And again, even trying to protect those ash molecules going into our waterways is another feature. We had a busy day out in the field today here, just getting best management practices ready for water quality to control, as was mentioned, the debris flows, but also just some of the smaller water quality volumes, really protecting the waterways from ash as well as the hazardous material deposits. As you enter your home, I mentioned that phase 1 removal by the EPA was underway, and that will continue. That's on the focus largely on those parcels that had that complete devastation. And before the Corps can move in, they need that kind of clean bill of health that no hazardous materials are found on the property. There's some unique situations where the hazardous materials are almost encapsulated or they can't be removed because of the rubble. EPA as well as the Corps of Engineers have a great phased approach, working collaboratively to remove and work together and be on the same parcel at the same time to remove that debris, remove the hazardous materials, and continue the process as you go. So working together, it's been very impressive. Phase 2 started this week with Corps of Engineers being on site, and it's impressive what they do. And we're honestly blessed to have the Los Angeles district here with the Corps in our backyard to help. Best management practices, steering back to the homeowner side of things, when you're starting to clean up your home, is first of all ventilation. So you've got your mask on and open up those doors and windows. If your home had minimal damage and you're working on ash and soot repair, get some ventilation going through there. Vacuuming is obviously very important, and using air purifiers wherever possible. For HEPA filters or high efficiency particulate filters are a must. They'll capture the ash and the soot appropriately and make sure it doesn't re-release as the vacuum's turned on each time. There's also tools like dry cleaning sponges that are formulated to pick up the ash and soot, highly absorbent and don't really require any type of liquid. And again, the whole goal is to pick up the ash without making it airborne again. And then finally, other products like vinegar helps break down the ash, and baking soda that can be used at the same time to deodorize. And literally you need to just go room by room, have that patience, have that safety as you clean up. In most cases, it depends on the amount of ash, but in many cases, if you've had a minor impact and overall the amount of ash on your property is de minimis, it can be collected in a plastic bag and then disposed of properly based on county and EPA guidelines. Overall, the key thing is to avoid that skin contact because it can cause several different issues, as I mentioned before. Well, we're also getting a sense of what fire is like in the year 2025. This is the largest cleanup of lithium-ion batteries that has ever occurred. Think of your electric vehicles. You can think of laptops in the home office, tablets, smartphones, all of those with those lithium batteries that oftentimes are in the news for various reasons. It's a significant issue in these fires. As you can see in the picture, first of all, identifying where these batteries are located is critical. These can remain hot and they can remain burning. Even though water's been put on them, they're encapsulated. So you have to be careful of hot batteries that remain after the fact. So disposing of them, taping off the end connections is key. And it's just critical to dispose of these properly. And the county's got some resources here that I'll share as far as hotlines that can be called. And we need to treat these with caution because they can reignite, and we need to make sure that they're disposed of properly. I mentioned the ammunitions and propane tanks and past fires that we've dealt with. This is kind of the newer issue, especially in this area, where we're going parcel by parcel, identifying the presence of electric vehicles and potential there. I think ultimately we will see some new regulations and guidance on how to take care of these. And in fires, we had so many people that got out because of their electric vehicle. A lot of people stalled out with lack of gas to get out of the area as they waited in line on the streets. So it's a catch-22 with some of these, and certainly the technology. Overall, we don't want to throw lithium-ion batteries away in the trash. We want to tape the terminals so they're safe. Excuse me, seal them up in a plastic bag, and then again, dispose of properly as you work forward. Let's talk about, as we wrap up, what's next? As we mentioned, we're still in this emergency mode. We will get to the rebuild process. We're presenting this tonight 20 years after Hurricane Katrina. And I remember when Katrina hit, because we were doing a series of Clean Water Act presentations and doing those in the community. And one of the questions was, do we rebuild? Do we rebuild New Orleans, knowing that it's in an area that is high risk for flooding and so forth? But at the end of the day, you look at the deep history and the rich history and cultural history. And of course, the audience said it was a slam dunk that you rebuild. But we can rebuild better and stronger. And how we do that is through project design features. And you can see in this structure, for example, and many have seen examples of these that either remain and did not burn, or they're just ideas that are being put forward based on studies and review. Project design features as we move forward is proper structural design. So what can be done to make these structures more efficient? As mentioned, we're working right now with City of Yorba Linda, Orange County Fire Authority on designing homes and structural eaves differently, protecting the homes so they're less likely to catch on fire. The streamlined permitting that the county is developing is going to be a true help. Cities like Malibu, as well as the city of LA and county, are creating one-stop shops for permitting that are opening this week that will be available daily for the community to come in, re-permit those buildings that were lost and those home structures that were lost, and truly build them back better in a way that makes them more resilient. So the streamlined permitting is exciting to see. Building codes as well will kick in. And then finally, the overall landscape. We know that we live in a desert environment. There's concerns for fires every year, a year-round fire season, but there are environmental considerations that can be made as far as vegetation maintenance in and around these structures. We're also using nature-based solutions, whether it's along the coastline. There's several projects out there right now that are studying embers and how embers can move in wind, and using oak trees, for example, rows of oak trees to stop ember displacement and movement of embers, compared to having non-native eucalyptus trees on site. And that vegetation management is critical as we move forward with the rebuild process, as we look out, first of all, on our own parcels, but then our community, our homeowners associations, and then finally the larger county area and ultimately the state. So I'm excited about the future to see what can be done as we move forward. Finally, I'll leave you with this another resources slide. As I mentioned, resources are being added daily. I think what's impressive nowadays is the web resources and the instant tracking that can be made. So the disaster assistance has been very helpful. Right now, too, we didn't go too much onto the FEMA side as well as the cleanup side, but right of entry approvals are critical. There's been over 8,000 that have been submitted. Property owners need that right of entry approval so the Corps can move forward if you elect to have the Corps remove that debris as they move forward with phase 2. So you can track that there. California.gov/LA wildfires or LA fire, excuse me, is an up-to-date tracker, and you can see exactly what's being done and what phase each community is in. It's been very impressive to watch. Hotlines as well, you can call. Most of the federal and governmental agencies are encouraging you to use the websites. They're far more effective, but these hotlines are also available. And as I mentioned, the lithium battery handling does have a hotline you can call. My final slide here too is just, here's some examples of when you go to some of these websites, you can see exactly where phase 1 is complete, underway, or where phase 2 has started. So with that, I will leave it there and turn it back over to you, Brent.
Right. Thank you, Richard. Very helpful. And also one website that I'm not sure has been mentioned is the LA County Bar.org/emergency, I believe it is, which has all the LA County bar resources in one location. There's been some questions asked that I'm going to answer myself real fast about written materials. I understand that the written materials have been provided via email by the LA County Bar for everybody who registered for this webinar. If you did not receive them, you can write to the LA County Bar. I don't know if they should write to Jesus Beltran directly or who they write to, but they are available through the LA County Bar. Now we have some other questions, and I'm going to go ahead and go back up to the insurance questions first, because those people have been very helpful, and I'll probably jump around a little bit because we have about 15 minutes left so we can get to everybody. Bryan, there were several questions asked about building code upgrade and, upgraded replacement cost coverages, and whether or not you get the extended replacement cost or building code upgrade coverages if you either buy a replacement house instead of rebuilding, or if you build a house at a different location. I suspect that they are going to be very insurance policy specific, so you have to review your actual policies to know that. But do you have any general experience on those types of questions?
I don't. I really don't. Yeah, you're right. That's very policy specific there. So sorry, I'm no help with that one.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to recommend people that you need to look at your actual policies to see what's covered. And you're going to have to be prepared, as Bryan, I know, mentioned before, to fight for your rights to maximize whatever payment you get from your insurance company. If you let them write you a smaller check, they will almost certainly do so. Another question that I do not know the answer to here is, do claims made for FEMA general benefits get reported to the insurers and go on a person's claims record? Does anybody know that?
That's another good question. I can't imagine that they would go on a claims record because there's no claim made with the actual carrier. So if you opt to use FEMA, I would assume the insurance carrier is glad that you're taking their money and not theirs, right? So I've never heard of that. I don't think that anything is reported. How would FEMA even know who your insurance carrier is? You would have a claim number associated to a loss. So I would say probably not, most likely not.
But I would recommend everybody review their policies. There may be provisions, I don't know, that require you to acknowledge if you receive money from other sources, and you just don't want to necessarily do anything to jeopardize what coverage you have. Okay, so this is a question for any of you probably, but I think it comes off something Richard may have said. Someone asked if they heard correctly that N95 masks can be obtained at libraries and or fire stations, and if so, are there websites that could help people find out where they can get N95 masks?
Yeah, microphone's still on. Based on the latest that I've heard, yes, they're still available at libraries, fire stations, pending the quantity and while supplies last, but they've got a lot usually. those resources that I showed on my last slide, especially the LA County based website, probably the best to go by. You can also call the hotline and just ask. The distribution centers of some of these supplies may change over time, but generally they are available. Also available at other locations, home improvement stores, and so forth. But the city areas and county areas do have those.
So I'm going to ask some more specific environmental questions to you all. One question we got is, what damage, if any, is caused by the fire retardant used fighting the fires?
Yeah, the FOS check, the red FOS check that we've seen so many videos on, and you know, coats the properties and vegetation that you saw. It's ammonium phosphate, and it's similar if you think about it like a fertilizer. And the biggest concern right now is it just getting into the waterways. You know, time is of the essence, and as many of you know that are from the area, you know, each year we have our fires, and then like clockwork, it rains within days, if not weeks. Overall, not a significant issue for human health. Maybe a minor irritant, if any. Typically, it's not an issue. The staining, sometimes we get questions on staining of property. It does go away over time. It could stain certain types of structures and that type of thing. But generally, the main concern is it just becoming part of water runoff.
Next question. For people whose houses survived in the fire areas, what can be done to assure that their safety when they move back in if toxic material is still being handled or processed nearby, whether it's debris removal or whatever it may be?
Yeah, there's a couple things. You know, there's a lot of different scenarios out there. In one particular case this week, 2 out of 6 homes were burned down in a cul-de-sac, and they're concerned about, their neighbors' materials and what they consist of. And, you know, they're going to have cleaning done. We offer combustion byproduct assessments that basically determines the extent of contamination throughout the home as it relates to the combustion byproduct in the neighborhood, and whether it contains asbestos or heavy metals there. You know, people are going to unfortunately be forced to be in their homes while construction and debris removal is going on right across the street or right next door. Some of the ideas that we've thrown around is cover the openings of your attic spaces or any openings that would communicate with the exterior air. You know, the debris removal process will probably be about a week or 2 weeks when it actually starts happening to your neighbors. I would recommend checking all your weather stripping, checking all your windows and your ventilation. There are a lot of good air filtration devices out there also. So if you can seal up these areas where you see daylight, or again, it may communicate with the exterior air, and then place your home under positive pressure using air filtration devices, that's going to be a really good method to make sure that nothing is coming inside your home. And again, it's going to be during normal work hours, so you don't have to have it running the entire time. But if you see bulldozers and people moving things around and doing debris removal, then that would be maybe where you prompt, you know, doing a positive pressure. And then also South Coast Air Quality Management District has jurisdiction in both of these areas. So they have hotlines and numbers where if you see dust or lack of dust control that is happening, you can file complaints and to them, and they are required to come out and respond to anything where there's a lack of dust control. And I remember, I mean, there's a lot of eyes on this when it's happening. So neighborhoods will just be aware.
Okay, sticking on the debris, someone wants to know where the debris ends up, whether it's hazardous or not. So when it's being removed from the site, where does it go to?
Yeah, that's to be studied, you know, the Corps Debris Center, there's a hotline if you, search Corps, U.S. Army Corps, Engineers Debris Center will come up with a phone number where you can ask some of those questions. Right now, generally what they'll do, and it's almost like getting back to the hazmat question on nearby, storage areas, is the first thing will be to create temporary storage areas to get the debris in the appropriate debris buckets, we'll call it, so you can separate out just like you do with trash, recyclables, trash, and so forth. It needs to get in the correct buckets so we can get it packaged up and so it doesn't go into the waterways. I think depending on the type of debris and materials, areas will be identified. Obviously, it's a very large area, and it will be a phased approach as well as multiple locations. I think what we've seen with Lahaina is this is where the patience kicks in as far as there will be temporary storage areas, temporary stockyards, and then in some ways, the material has to be moved out of the area. And that will be identified, you know, in hazardous material types of storage and disposal. There's containment and then there's secondary containment. I heard earlier today that talks and studies are already underway with Caltrans, with PCH, as well as other agencies identifying traffic routes and studying those routes to make sure they're safe. But ultimately, once the waste is quantified, they'll start to have those sites. And if you check out some of those resources that we've shared, they'll keep everyone up to date, especially as we get out of phase 1 and more into that phase 2, phase 3 process.
Bryan, question for you is, do you know whether debris removal coverage applies to both phase 1 and phase 2 cleanups?
Debris removal coverage apply to site cleanup of.
The phase 1 and phase 2 cleanups being done, does it apply to both? Does it apply to one of them? If you know.
I don't know that. I mean, I would guess that it's part of the phase 1. Yeah, I don't know offhand.
Okay.
You
Now,
have to know what you're dealing with first, right? So you want to survey the material and whether you opt in or opt out with FEMA or Army Corps of Engineer. That's really kind of phase 1 is, are you dealing with a hazardous material? And it goes back to what Richard's talking about, where you classify the material. Is it non-haz or is it construction debris? And then the handling procedures are different. So that's sort of the process there.
So this is going to be the last question, given the time we're at here. Based on past fires, what are the environmental barriers to rebuilding at the fire sites?
What I can tell you from my experience with Woolsey wildfire, where there was a lot of total loss of structures, is following debris removal and potentially concrete slab and foundation removal. The county was requiring heavy metals surveys of the soils. So gridding out the footprint of the building, collecting soil samples prior to rebuild was a requirement. That's one thing I know. And worst case scenario, where we had a couple where there's exposure limits and total threshold limit values established for specific types of metals. If they were above that, then you grade down another 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches, and or you bring in clean soil and you till it in together.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time with us and their knowledge with us tonight. To again answer the question, if you did not receive your written materials, I put it into the answer section, but please write to Jesus Beltran at the county bar. His email is jbeltran at LACBA.org. And again, I thank everybody for attending and thank all the panelists for sharing their time with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brent.